Okay, so we're going to start. Hi, everybody. We are in class number 5. As always, our learning is dedicated to the safe and immediate return of our hostages and to the safety and the success of our soldiers and to the refuah shlema, physically, emotionally, mentally, of everyone who needs it. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We have a few things we want to pick up from, yes, amen. I think we all are thinking. A few things we want to finish up from last time, but really they all do tie together to the same theme, which I put here as what's for dinner. But basically, it's talking about practical matters. How did people make a living? Where was the farming done? And we're going to do sort of the second half is going to be about certain types of food, but we're going to start out with things like the marketplace and work. Okay. Last time we talked about money, and we're going to talk about how you make that money and how you spend it. Okay. So obviously this is a beautiful picture of an olive harvest. We're going to get to olives and olive oil. We're going to talk about that as we continue. Okay. Yofi. Source sheets. Okay, yes, source sheets are in the chat for anybody who wants. Okay. Weights. Okay, we're going to talk about weights and measures. People bought things by weight. People bought things by volume. Things were not generally pre-packaged, or we're going to see an interesting exception to that in a minute from one of the rabbis, one of the Tanaim. Okay, but mostly what happened is we would call it very renewable resources, right? We'd be very pleased with this today. People would come to the market with their containers, right? I'm going to bring my clay jar that I'm going to fill up with olive oil. I'm going to bring my sack, or I'm going to bring my whatever it is box. I'm going to fill it with the figs that I'm going to buy, or the dates, or whatever it is. Sometimes you're using the measurements of the storekeeper, right? He's measuring out in his measuring cups. We're going to see that in a minute. And you're weighing your produce. You buy things by weight or by volume. Okay, we're going to see volume in a minute in our next slide, but here we're talking about weight. Okay, and the way you buy things by weight, obviously we don't have scales like we have today, computerized scales. Think about, and this is appropriate for the time of year, right? Think about your old Rosh Hashanah cards, right? With the image of the scales, right? With the 2 dishes. One dish you put a weight that is 1 kilo, 1 pound, a half a pound, whatever it is. The other one, you put your bananas, and when you have enough bananas that the 2 are equal, then you know you have that amount. However, the Torah emphasizes in quite a few places the idea of having fair weights, having honest weights, right? I brought you 2 of the sources here from Devarim. You shall not have in your pouch alternate weights, larger and small. You should not have in your house alternate measures, a larger and a smaller. Right? Another source from Vayikra, you should have an honest balance, honest weights, honest ephah, and honest hin, right? Ephah and hin are different kinds of weights. I am the Lord your God. We'll come back to that in a second. But first of all, what's the idea here? Why is there such an emphasis? So if you think about it, right, it's very easy to shave just a bit off of your weight. Not enough that anybody will notice, but instead of a pound of bananas being 7 bananas, for example, right? I shave off just a little bit. And what I think the customer thinks I'm buying a pound of bananas, really, it's 6 bananas, 6.5 bananas. The storekeeper makes a little bit each time. He doesn't make a huge amount. If he made it too obvious, people would catch on. The customer is none the wiser, and the storekeeper makes a nice amount of money by the end of the week. Okay, and this is something that people could do pretty easily without detection. And that's the end of the pasuk here. I am the Lord your God. Even if you think nobody's watching, God is watching. Now we're going to see in a moment that there actually was somebody whose job it was to check the weights. We'll come to that in a second. But I brought you something here that is not connected to the Tanaim or the time of the Beit HaMikdash, but is connected to Tanakh times, and it's great. This is the picture here on the top. Okay, you may remember in learning Sefer Shmuel, okay, that the Philistines controlled metalworking. Okay, and so the Israelites, not only could they not make weapons, but they couldn't even make their farm implements. And they had to bring these things to the Philistines in order to be sharpened, to be fixed. And we have this verse. Here's the last source here. It's kind of a strange verse. The charge for sharpening was a pim for plowshares, mattocks, three-pronged forks, and axes, or saying the goes. Now we understood a pim must be either a kind of money, or maybe it's a kind of weight, but nobody knew what it was, right? They didn't know what it was until about a few decades ago, somebody discovered a metal weight, as you can see over here. And if you look carefully, you can see that it has letters on it. Okay, and those letters in the old Hebrew writing are Pei, Yud, Mem, Pim. Okay, this is a pim. So a pim is a weight. It's just like we would say a kilo or a pound or an ounce. Okay, that's what a pim is. So that's just a great example of archaeology illuminating Tanakh for us. Okay. Now, the idea that you have to have honest weights, I saw someone put in the chat, obviously every society wants honest weights, right? And so in Roman society and in Babylonian society, you had a guy whose job it was to go around to the marketplace and check the weights and check the measures. This guy was called, in the Roman world at least, the agoronomos, right? Agora is a marketplace in Greek, right? And the agoronomos, or the agronomos, was the guy whose job it was to make sure that the weights are correct and to make sure that the measures are correct. Now, if you look at the top here, this is a great this is a table that is called a mensa ponderaria. Mensa is in a table, okay? It's a measuring table, and what it is, it's for things that you sell by volume, not things that you sell by weight, okay? What you do is like this. You can see different sizes. You have a little plug on the bottom, okay? And you pour into, let's take it as an example, the smallest one. Let's pretend for a moment that this is an ounce, okay? You pour in an ounce of whatever it might be, right, of oil, right? Fill it up to the top. Then you take the merchant's measuring cup that he's supposed to use for an ounce. You unplug the bottom, you put your measuring cup there, and check, is it the same? If it's not the same, the merchant better get some new measuring cups. Sometimes people are dishonest. Sometimes people are just inaccurate. Okay, but this was something that was known in the Roman world. It was known in the Babylonian world, and we actually found, this table was found in Italy, but we found a piece of a table like this, and you can see it down here in the city of David in Jerusalem, right? The bottom left picture. It's not the whole thing. It's only one little piece, but you can see it's the same thing, right? You have this nice round cup-like opening, and if you look in the middle on the bottom, there's a little hole so that it can be plugged and that it can be opened up. So that's how you would go around and check that the volume is correct. In Rome, okay, in the Temple of Jupiter, you had something called the Amphora Capitoline, which was like the gold standard, right? The actual correct amount that things are supposed to be. Okay? But the agoranomos' job was to go around to check this, and we have various sources about this. Okay, in Babylonia, we have Rav. We talked about Rav a few classes ago. Rav was appointed the market overseer, the agoronomi, by the head of the diaspora, by the Reish Galuta, by the exilarch. He intervened about measuring vessels, but not prices, right? So we have a discussion in the Gemara whether the agronomos' job was only to make sure the weights and the measures are correct, or was it also to set the prices, to make sure there was no price gouging? Rav didn't think that his job included setting the prices. The exilarch obviously did think so. So the head of the diaspora, the exilarch, jailed him. Right? And the corresponding Gemara, the Bavli, we have a discussion about this. A sage is taught you shall not have, teaches that the court appoints market inspectors to supervise the accuracy of the measures, but not for prices. So Rav is following what the rabbis teach, but the Reish Galuta, the exilarch, says, no, your job includes more than that. Okay, but it gives us a sense of what is the marketplace like. Okay, now this agoronomos job, we hear about Rav doing it in Babylonia. We've also found an inscription in the very limited excavations that were done in the city of Jaffa, right? Jaffa, Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is a very new city. Jaffa is a very old city. And in the center of today, the center of kind of the touristy part of Jaffa, 1950s, there were excavations that were done there. There was a house that was discovered, was a Jewish house, because we know it was a Jewish house because they had these stone vessels. And we have an inscription there that talks about a guy called Judah the Agoronomos, a Greek inscription, but with clearly that there are no Greek or Roman Judahs, right? Judah is clearly a Jew, right? So here you have this Jewish guy who is appointed to be the market inspector in Jaffa. Now, I told you pre-packaging, very rare, okay? However, the Gemara in Beitza gives us a great example of somebody who did pre-package. This is going to connect to something we're going to learn a little bit later tonight, and that's about what you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. Okay, so we have this story here, the last source. It was an incident involving Abba Shaul ben Botnit, who would fill his measures on the eve of a festival and give them to his customers on the festival. Now, as we're going to see, because of the need to have fresh food and the lack of refrigeration, people would go to the market even on Yom Tov, okay? And that was normal. Now they had to figure out ways to do it that was in the spirit of Yom Tov. Obviously, you wouldn't hand over money. You were not supposed to measure things. You were supposed to figure it out before in a different way. And that's what Abba Shaul would do. He would pre-measure his amounts, and then he would give them, and then after the Yom Tov was over, people would come and pay. Okay, now we have another Abba Shaul, a different Abba Shaul here, who says, no, it wasn't only about Yom Tov. He would do this even on the intermediate days of the festival because of the clarity of the measures. What does that mean, right? The rabbis say even on weekday is proper to do so because of the draining of the measures. Abba Shaul ben Botnit wanted to make sure, right, when you buy the boxes of cereal, and it says the contents may have settled, right? Abba Shaul wanted to make sure that the contents settled, that the contents that he was really giving people the amount that they deserved, that they settled down, and therefore he was giving the right amount. So he was an example of somebody who's very honest, as opposed to people who say, maybe they weren't so careful, maybe they weren't so honest. Okay, so that's our measures. Where does the money come from to buy these things? Obviously, you have to go to work. How do the rabbis feel about work? Okay, we'll come to this picture in a minute, which is a great picture, but hold on. Sorry, just go back for 1 second. If you take a look, the measuring table here, both of them are made out of stone. That makes sense. It needs to be something that lasts, okay? Something that doesn't get scraped away. But you can see that the measuring cups here are also made out of stone. We're not sure, by the way, that these are measuring cups or they're just cups. We've given them the name measuring cups. But stone, very important, when you find stone vessels, almost always, at least in the land of Israel, we assume that this is a Jewish home in Second Temple times because stone vessels are a pain. They're hard to make, they're expensive, but they have one great quality: they don't become impure, okay? Clay becomes impure, wood becomes impure, stone, if somebody drops dead in the kitchen, the stone stays pure. So Jews who cared a lot about purity in Second Temple times would make stuff out of stone. Okay. Work. So mostly the rabbis are pro-work. And we have a few statements that I brought you here, right? Very famous one, right? In Pirkei Avot, Shmaya used to say, love labor, ahov et hamelacha. Okay? Another source here from the Midrash Tanaim, okay? Beloved is work because of all his creations, God only gave man work, right? It's a great statement. We'll see the inverse of it in a second, meaning God doesn't require animals to work. Animals find their food. They don't go to work. And people do have to go to work in order to be able to eat. And this Medrash is saying that's a good thing, right? God allowed us to work because working is something that's going to give us dignity, that's going to give us a purpose, that's going to be very important to us. Okay, skip the next source for a second. We'll come back to it in a minute. But we have another pro-working source, right? When Rabbi Yehuda would go to the study hall, right, this Gemara in Nedarim, he would carry a pitcher on his shoulder saying, labor is great as it brings honor to the laborer. Okay, so in general, the rabbis are pro-work. We also have approaches that are kind of neutral about work, right? That's the source down here in Bava Batra. As Rav said to Rav Kahana, his student, skin a carcass in the market and take payment, but do not say I am a great man and this matter is beneath me, right? We've all heard variations of this phrase, right? It's better to be a garbage man. It's better to be a clerk than to take tzedakah, right? You have to work, you have to make a living, you do what needs to be done. So I'd say this is more of a neutral approach as opposed to an idea that, wow, work is what sets us apart from the animals. Okay? And then we have here and there a more negative approach. I have a famous Gemara. I didn't actually bring it here too long, but we have a disagreement between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Right? Rabbi Yishmael says you have to work and you have to, you'll learn Torah, right? Be'ikita bo yomam v'layla, learning Torah night and day means you should learn a little Torah in the day and learn a little Torah in the night, but mostly you should do your job. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, what are you talking about? If I, sow when the time of sowing and I reap when the time of reaping and I thresh in the time of threshing, Torah matehela, when I make Torah. Instead, I should learn all day and trust in God that He's going to provide for me. So this is definitely a negative approach to working. And actually, very interesting. The Gemara goes on and says, some people tried many people have tried Rabbi Yishmael's way and succeeded. Some people have tried Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's way and not succeeded, right? It's not super practical. Maybe it worked for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, doesn't work for most of us. Okay? And here we have, and this is great because we have this Gemara here in Kiddushin, the third source here, which is the exact inverse of what we saw in the Medrash. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, have you ever seen a beast or a bird that has a trade? And yet they earn their livelihood without anguish. And all these were created only to serve me. And I, a human being, was created to serve the one who formed me. Is it not right that I should earn my livelihood without anguish? Meaning animals serve people. Animals don't have to work. Why should people have to work, says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. But I, as in humans, have committed evil actions and have lost my livelihood. Right? So it's actually the opposite, right? And we have an echo of that, by the way, in the New Testament. Also, right, that the lilies of the field don't have to do anything but be beautiful, right? Same idea. So we have different approaches to work. And everybody, pretty much, except for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, acknowledges that you do have to go to work, okay? But be smart, right? As the Mishnah puts it, right? The world needs all sorts, but better that you should be a perfumer and not a tanner, right? If it can help not being a garbage man, don't be a garbage man. Okay? And then we have instructions about what you should teach your child, right? You should teach your child a trade, but try to do something that is going to make them happy and it's going to be clean and easy, as Rabbi Meir says, right? Look at the last source here. Rabbi Meir says a person should always teach his son a clean and easy trade and pray to the one whom wealth and property belong, as there is no trade that does not include wealth and poverty. Should be here, sorry. Oh, no, wealth and property, sorry. As there is no trade that does not include both poverty and wealth, right? We all know you can teach, you can learn a trade, you can work hard at it, but there is such a thing as mazel, and you need prayer also to succeed in what you do. Okay? And then this is the Gemara. The Mishnah is a long Mishnah at the end of Kiddushin, and then Gemara talking about what are the appropriate trades, and there are certain things you're supposed to stay away from. So we have one example here. Abba Guria of Saidan says in the name of Abba Guria, a person may not teach his son the trade of a donkey driver, a camel driver, a pot maker, a sailor, a shepherd, a storekeeper. Why? What's wrong with all these things? The reason for all these is the same as their trades are the trades of robbers. He's not saying everybody who's a donkey driver is a robber, everybody who's a shepherd is a robber, but there's more opportunity, right? How would we update this, right? Maybe don't teach your son to be a Wall Street trader, right? We could all think of our examples. By the way, the Gemara goes on and talks about trades that bring you too much in contact with women. Try not to do things that are immodest. Okay? Don't be a barber. Don't be somebody who sells things only to women, because as much as you might be a good, modest person, it's putting yourself into situations that are not necessarily good for you. Okay, the picture on the right here, I think my husband found it years and years ago. We loved it. And then when I was preparing this class, I said to him, do you have this picture somewhere? And he found it in like 10 seconds on the internet. And this, of course, is a page from the Yellow Pages, the Chazal Yellow Pages. telling us who worked in what. Now, obviously, there are more than this, and some of these, by the way, are not so accurate. Shammai, I think, is in Sukkah and not in Brachot. I didn't look them all up, but not all of them are accurate. But it gives us an idea. What were the rabbis? The rabbis were everything ranging from porters to doctors to ditch diggers, shoemakers, needle makers, right? We have all different kinds of professions that the rabbis had. We also hear about rabbis that own land, that are wealthy, that have orchards, right? That have property and they're taking care of their property. We rarely hear about a scholar who doesn't have some kind of a job, right? That doesn't, even someone like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the patriarch, who's very wealthy. He's not wealthy because he's the patriarch. He's not paid a salary. He's wealthy because he has lots of land, and he makes money from his land. So we definitely have, at least in practice, even if in theory we have difference of opinion, but in practice, almost nobody makes a living being a rabbi, right? And of course, here we have not only the Tanaim and the Moraim, but of course we have the Rambam, who talks explicitly about not making a living from your Torah, right? And how do we get around that today? We talk about giving sachar to watch the children as opposed to teaching them. We will not get into a whole philosophical conversation. Okay, women, ladies, this is for us. As we know, a woman's work is never done. Okay, so besides working, to use what was the proper terminology in the 70s and the 80s, today we probably don't say it like this, but working outside the home, right? There were women who worked outside the home, whether it was making all kinds of things or if she had property. There was so much work inside the home. Okay, and the Gemara and the Mishnah and Ketubot gives us this exhausting, it's like tiring to read this list, right? These are tasks that a wife must perform for her husband. She grinds wheat into flour, she bakes and washes clothes, cooks and nurses her child, makes her husband bed, and spins wool, right? And this is not even things like childcare, right? This is just the, we think about how much we work today, but the idea that you have to grind the wheat into flour, that you have to take the clothing down to the river and wash it, right? Very difficult. However, hope is on the way, because the Mishnah continues and says, if you have money, as we know, if you have money, life looks different, right? If you have money, you can get rid of some of these jobs, right? So if she brought him one maidservant, what does it mean? If she brought him, right, she brings into the marriage, she's coming in with money, she's coming in with her servants. If she, now take a look at the progression, we'll talk about it in a second. If she brought him one maidservant, the wife does not grind, it does not bake, it does not wash clothes. If she brought him two, she does not cook and does not nurse her child. If she brought him three, she does not make his bed and does not spin wool. If she brought him four, she may sit in a chair, katedra. Okay, so you can look at this list in two ways, right? You can look at this list and say, okay, what is she contracting out first? The hardest jobs, right? Grinding wheat into flour, making the bread, washing the clothes. That's a lot of labor. That's really hard work. She can send that out. Nursing her child, also, it's weird for us to picture that. I like to think of it as child care, right? You can hire a nanny. We today don't like that idea that someone else should nurse your child, but we're certainly into the idea of childcare. All right. So we're going from the hardest jobs to the less taxing jobs. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is we're going from the jobs that are outside the home, not intimate. Those are, you can be quick to get rid of, to contract out. But as we get closer and closer to the home and literally to her bedroom, right? That you shouldn't be contracting out so fast, right? And that's where we have this Gemara, a couple of pages after the Mishnah. Yitzchak Bar Hananya said that Rav Huna said, although they said she may sit in a chair, right, a cathedra, she should still pour his cup and make his bed and wash his face, hands, and feet. Rav Yitzchak Bar Hananya is giving us, or Rav Huna really, is giving us less of a halachic decision and more good advice. Meaning, don't be so quick, wife, to get rid of those things that are what we would think of as like acts of service, acts of love. Okay, make his bed. Don't think of it as like, changing the sheets. Think of it as like making up the bed before you go to sleep. So things that will make her lovely in his eyes. He's giving it as marriage advice, really, right? These are acts of love. So that's Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Hanania. Now I brought you two pictures here. Okay, one picture on the bottom on the right here is a klina. Okay, when we talk about reclining or a couch, this is a very useful piece of furniture in the Greek and the Roman household, and also in the Jewish household. This is obviously you put on it some kind of mat, right? This is what you recline on at your banquet, but it's also what you sleep on. Okay? If you have a fancier bed, there are much less fancier beds on ropes, but this is a kind of a fancier bed. The other picture on the top here is a cathedra. Right? What is a cathedra? A cathedra we would call today probably an armchair. Okay. The picture on the right here is from a synagogue in the north, synagogue in Chorazim, but they found this as a piece of synagogue furniture, right? It's called the Cathedra de Moshe. We're not 100% sure what it's used for. It could be that it's used by the person who's reading the Torah. It could be that it's like, Fiddler on the Roof when Tabia says he wants a seat by the eastern wall, right? This is the seat for the gvir. This is the seat for the rabbi or the rich guy, right? But this is a cathedra. Now, interestingly, in modern Hebrew, cathedra means like adult education. Like in my community, we have cathedra where they have all these different courses. I don't think the rabbis could even imagine a world where this woman with her 4 maidservants is really going to a cathedra, right? That's what we would think today. You have free time. You can go to a class in the morning, you can go to the gym, and then you can go out to lunch. They're not thinking of it that way, but I think it's great to imagine it updated. Now we said if she has 4 maidservants, she can sit in a chair, but we have a different opinion. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol. Even if she brought him 100 maidservants, he can compel her to spin wool, since idleness leads to licentiousness. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer cannot imagine a world where a woman with free time is going to sit with a book. This is not something that is part of his reality. So if you have all this free time, you're going to get into trouble, right? Don't get into trouble, right? We have a nicer version of this, right? Where different rabbi says it's going to lead to boredom and she's going to be unhappy, which also, we've all read those novels about, women in the 50s whose husbands forbade them to work and they finished cleaning the house. And then what do you do all day, right? So there is that idea. But Rabbi Eliezer says she's got to keep working because otherwise she's going to get into trouble. What's the classic women's work? Spinning, right? Even today, even in English, right? In Old English, and we don't use it so much today, but the word still exists, right? What's a woman who never got married, who doesn't have anything to do with herself? She's a spinster, right? She's a spinster. And she's not a childless cat lady. She's a spinster. Okay. And so spinning is like this ultimate women's work. Okay. And we hear this already in Torah, right? When they're preparing the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and all the skilled women spun with their hands and brought what they had spun in blue, purple, and crimson yarns and in fine linen, right? This is what's called chokhmat nashim, or nashim chachamot. And Rabbi Eliezer said, Ein chokhmah leisha ela bapelech. There is no wisdom for a woman except with the spindle, which, by the way, Alice Shalby, Aleh Shalom, years ago when she created the very well-known girls' high school in Jerusalem, she called it Pelech. She called it spindle because she said there's no wisdom for a woman except with a spindle, and she took that and turned it on its head. So he says that's what a woman's, that's her chokhmah, that's her wisdom. And all over the world, right? When I wanted pictures of spindles, it was very easy to find pictures of women with spindles because this is women's work. Okay? It's something that you can do while you're watching your child, while you're waiting for the bread to rise, while you're doing 1,000,001 other things, and it brings in some income. Okay? But it's also used, the Gemara uses it to talk about women's wisdom, and it also uses it in a clever way to talk about women's nature, right? We have this great expression in Megillah, the Gemara in Megillah, the bottom one here, the Megillah Yudalid. While a woman is engaged in conversation, she also holds the spindle, right? Which is a nice way of saying a woman is always weaving her web. She's always thinking of the next step. What can I do now? How can I set up this one with that one? How can I get my husband a job? How can I figure out how my children can have, get ahead in school, right? She's always holding the spindle. So women's work and spinning very much identified. Okay, we're going to move into more like professions. I didn't do too many, but I wanted to do a few that stand out. One is a scribe. Okay, a scribe is what we think of today, right? The picture that you have here on the bottom right. So for Stam, somebody writes mezuzot, who writes Megillot, who writes a Sefer Torah. That is one job of a scribe, a sofer. But not only, right? It's also to write up regular documents, okay? To write letters. Think about, in villages where people are illiterate, there's the one guy who knows how to read and write, and everybody comes to him and says, will you write a letter to my uncle? Will you write me this contract for my house? Will you, whatever it is, right? People didn't, not everybody knew how to write. Not everybody knew the proper formula, right? If we have to write a get, if we have to write a ketubah, if we have to write a business document, the materials are not so easy to come by. So there's a job that is called a scribe. We call it a sofer, but there's an older word. I don't know if it's an older word. It's a Mishnaic word, which is lavlar. Okay? A lavlar is really comes from the Latin. Okay? Liber was a book. Liber, library. Lavlar is the guy who writes the Liber, writes the book. Okay? And the most famous lavlar of the Tanaim is Rabbi Meir. Okay? Rabbi Meir tells us a few different places about how he is a scribe and how he knows what to do. So I brought you two examples here. When I came to study with Rabbi Yishmael, he said to me, my son, what is your vocation? I replied, I am a scribe, I'm a lavlar. He said to me, my son, be careful in your vocation, as your vocation is heavenly service, and care must be taken lest you omit a single letter or add a single letter out of place, and you will end up destroying the whole world in its entirety. And the Gemara goes on and gives examples of how you could write something wrong in the Torah and give a completely different impression of what the truth is supposed to be. Okay, so here we have Rabbi Meir, who it seems studied with Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Meir, just to remind us, is the generation after Bar Kokhba, right? After the martyrs of the story of the persecution by the Romans. He studies Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, and we're going to see it in this next Gemara in Sota. He also studies with Rabbi Yishmael's chavruta, with his partner, Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel says in the name of Rabbi Meir, when I was studying Torah before Rabbi Akiva, I used to put iron sulfate into the ink, and he did not say anything to me, right? This is a discussion of how you properly prepare the ink. You can see on the right here, we have all the elements that go into making the ink. The ink for a sofer has to be specially made so that it lasts, it doesn't fade. So he's explaining what he used to use. Afterwards, when I came to learn Torah before Rabbi Yishmael, he said to me, my son, what is your vocation, right? And then we go on. But it's fascinating because it tells us that Rabbi Meir studied with both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. He was a very young man before the decrees and the Romans came and killed them both. Okay, so that's a sofer. Most people, not most people, many people are farmers. Okay, people need to eat. Farmers provide food for their families, but they also might sell to more places. Farms generally are on the periphery of cities, okay? And certainly they are not in Jerusalem. Okay, we have a lot of rules about Jerusalem during temple times, okay, in order to preserve the sanctity and the purity of Jerusalem. So here in Bava Kama, take a look. 10 matters were stated with regard to Jerusalem. One may not establish garbage dumps in Jerusalem. One may not build kilns in it. One may not plant gardens and orchards, right? Saying gardens, nice, that's a good idea, right? No, because then you're going to have dirt, you're going to have manure, okay, except for the rose gardens that were already there from the time of the early prophets. One may not raise chickens. We'll come back to the chickens. We don't want all of the animals, dirt, manure, smells, industrial zones, right? We don't want that stuff in Jerusalem. However, Jerusalem needs a lot of food. Okay, you have residents of the city. Realize that most of the residents of Jerusalem are not people who grow their own food. You have the Kohanim, you have the Leviim, they're working in the Beit HaMikdash. You have people who are government functionaries. You have teachers, a lot like Jerusalem today. You don't have people who are producing food. Okay, not only that, you have a lot of visitors to Jerusalem. Okay, some people say that the population of Jerusalem doubled in the time of the regalim, of the pilgrimage festivals. Okay, and you have the temple, which needs oil and wine and animals, right? All kinds of things that need to be grown. So how do you solve this problem? So how Jerusalem solved this problem was that there was a ring of farms around the city. Basically, Jerusalem in temple times has two rings around it. The inner ring is burial, right? You're not allowed to bury in the city. So we have burial caves on the periphery of the city of Jerusalem. An outer ring, right? A few kilometers outside the city, you have farms. Okay. And we found a bunch of these farms in Karim in the southwest of the city, Ramat Rachel in the southeast of the city, Givat Ram in the west, Isawiya and Bethany and Beit Pagi in the east, Gilo in the south. All of these were farms. Okay? Some of them specialized in particular things, right? In Karim, we find tons of wine presses. It seems they grew grapes and they made wine. Okay? Now, they're producing, and a lot of what they're producing, they want to be able to sell to the temple. So they have to be careful to make things in purity. Okay, so a lot of times you will find, not only in Jerusalem, in other places as well, that right next to the wine press, the olive press, you have a mikvah. Okay, right next to my house, Path of the Patriarchs, there is a beautiful, the largest mikvah that we have found so far in Israel. And right next to it is a small wine press, because if you look up, you'll see even today, there are vineyards all around that area. Okay, so I brought you two examples here. One is over here on the right. This is a mikvah in Ramat Rachel, okay, a second temple period mikvah. Over here on the left, this is not from the area of Jerusalem. This is from Usha in the Galilee, but right near all of the wine presses and the olive presses, you have mikvaot, okay? And we have a great Mishnah that refers to this, right? Mishnah in Tarot, if the olive workers or the grape harvesters were brought within the domain of the cavern, right? We assume the mikvah is in a cave. In this case, it is sufficient, meaning Rabbi Meir says, do I have to stand there and watch and see that the workers actually go into the mikvah, or is it enough to bring them close, right? Is it enough to put up that sign in the restroom saying all workers must wash their hands with soap? Or do I actually have to go in with the guy and watch him wash his hands with soap, right? So Rabbi Meir says, there and you trust them, right? Why are we so suspicious? Because the workers are usually amei haaretz. They're not people who care so much about Tara, but we bring them and we trust them. Rabbi Yossi says, no. He should stand over them until they immerse. Okay, we have this idea that you want to prepare your wine, your oil, things that are liquid become impure very easily. We want to prepare them in purity so that we can sell them to the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, let's talk about food for a second. Now you're saying, why did I put in this picture of a refrigerator on the bottom? Okay, now I don't know how many of you have looked at the calendar. I don't mean to panic you. Rosh Hashanah this year is 3 days. Okay, by us, I will just tell you that last night on my Yishuv WhatsApp list, they were talking about how insane the supermarket is already. And people panic with 3 days, especially in Israel, because we don't have 3 days. What do we do in our modern world? Okay, we cook and freeze a lot of stuff because we have refrigerators. Okay, sometimes people even cook on Yom Tov, but rarely. Okay, what did they do in ancient times? They don't have refrigeration. So everything that has to be prepared that day. Now, what are you going to do on Shabbat? You're not allowed to cook. So you have to prepare beforehand. We have things that we put in the oven, right? Chamin, shulent, it cooks overnight, but you can't prepare anything on Shabbat. But on Yom Tov, we have a special law, right? Take a look at the Torah, the pasuk here. You shall celebrate on the first day, on the seventh day, no work should be done, only what every person is to eat, okay? Ochel nefesh is what we call it in Hebrew. That alone may be prepared by you. This is an out on Yom Tov as opposed to Shabbat. Obviously, if Yom Tov falls on Shabbat, it's different. But Yom Tov as opposed to Shabbat, you can cook. Now, the rabbis took this idea and they said, okay, fresh food is better than food that's prepared before. Food that's prepared before will either get all stale, like bread, or might even spoil. So when we are allowed, when we're able to do that, we want to prepare as much as we can within certain parameters. Okay. You cannot make things for the future. You cannot make something that hasn't come into existence before Yom Tov, right? We have a whole Masechet called Masechet Beitzah, which is named after the first Mishnah, which talks about what if your egg is born on Yom Tov? Can you use it or not, right? It has to have existed in the world before Yom Tov, okay? But most importantly, the rabbis say, use your common sense. If it's something you could have done before Yom Tov without any harm to the food, you do it before. Okay, so that means no harvesting, no threshing, no hunting, no trapping, all that stuff you could have done before Yom Tov. Okay, don't say, oh, I have a day off. I'm going to do all of my slaughtering of chickens for the whole season, right? I'm going to do all of my threshing. No, you can't do that. But things that are going to be better if you make them on Yom Tov, kneading, baking, slaughtering an animal. I think about that. That's like so against our spirit of Yom Tov, but no problem with doing that. Even shopping, right? Even shopping, because the animal you want, you don't have a place to keep it. You don't know what you're going to do with it. You're going to go buy it on Yom Tov. Okay. So it's actually very fascinating. It's a different perspective than on how we think about Yom Tov, right? But this is what they had to do. And people, if you read Masechet Beitzah, storekeepers would open up their stores, right? That's what we were reading about with Abba Shaul ben Botnit. They would open their stores. They wouldn't take money. You'd have to buy, on account. You'd have to trust, but you could bring home stuff from the store, right? So let's just look at some of these sources here. Rav Chanan bar Rava said to Rav Ashi, the sages said, as much as it is possible to modify the weekday manner, one should modify in a festival. Try to do things differently. Try to do things less. Try to do things in a different manner, okay? But still, you can do it. Now, let's talk about meat for a second, okay? In a world without refrigeration, you don't slaughter a cow unless you're expecting a lot of company, okay? It might slaughter a cow for a wedding, you might slaughter a cow for a holiday that your whole family is coming, or you might divide up the cow with other people. And you can do that on Yom Tov, okay? So that we see there's a custom, mitzvah is probably too much, but certainly a custom to eat meat on Yom Tov. Take a look at this Mishnah and Shulie. On 4 occasions during the year, meat eating is common. It's actually interesting because it's not what we would do. Okay? The eve of the last day of the festival of Sukkot, right? Shmini Atzeret, that's fine. The eve of the first day of the festival of Pesach, right? Leil Seder. Also, the eve of Shavuot, right? Which for us is like dairy cheesecake. No, they ate meat. And the eve of Rosh Hashanah. And according to the statement of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the eve of Yom Kippur in the Galilee is included as well. Okay, so I want to have meat because the rabbi said I should have meat, but I don't have enough people to have meat. So what do? I contract with other people and we divide it up and we pay together. So that's what this Mishnah here is talking about. One may not register to have a portion of an animal on a festival ab initio, meaning lechatchila, beforehand, but you can do it on the eve of the festival. One may register for the animal on the eve of the festival and slaughter it and divide it between them on the festival itself. Rabbi Yehuda says a person may weigh the meat against a vessel or against a cleaver and then calculate it later. And the rabbi said, well, may not look at the pans of the balance scale at all, right? So it has to be different, but okay, fine. Now let's say I want to have something that's special for Shabbat. During the week, what do most people eat? They don't eat a lot of meat. Right? They're eating legumes, they're eating fruit, dried fruit, even vegetables, not so much. That's more of a fancy thing to eat. Okay. If you had a goat or a cow, you're having milk, you're having cheese, you're having eggs if you have chickens. We'll get to chickens in a minute. What if you want to have something for Shabbat? So you're going to have a small animal. Okay. Chickens, like I said, we'll talk about, or doves. This is called a columbarium up here on top. This is something that we find all over. Basically, these are niches that are cut into rock, into a cave usually. Doves are very homing animals. They like to come back. They like to mate for life. They'll come back and they'll nest if you give them a place to nest, and they'll just keep on coming back. So you can raise doves, you can eat their eggs, you can use their fertilizer, and they're very nice, easy dinner. Take a dove, eat it, no leftovers, no worries about refrigeration. So that's why we find that all over. What about chickens? Okay, chickens are domesticated already in the time of Tanakh. If you look, this was, I think, probably my favorite thing today. Okay, if you look on the bottom here, you have a seal. Okay, we know in ancient times people had seals that they would sign their documents with, seal impressions, or what you get from the other side of the seal. This is a seal that was discovered in a place called Mitzpah, what we call today Nebi Samuel, outside of Jerusalem. You can see it's from biblical times, First Temple times, because we've got those old Hebrew letters. It says Li Yozniyahu Eved HaMelech, Yozniyahu, the slave of the king. Which king? We don't know. It's from 7th century before the Common Era, but take a look at what Yozniyahu decided to put as his picture. It's a rooster. Why does Yozniyahu like roosters? Maybe he was into cockfighting. Maybe he had a pet rooster. I don't know, but it's great, right? It's a great example of something that we hear about, but we don't always see. Okay, now chickens are very, very widespread by Second Temple times. And we really have to ask the question, right? If chickens are already around in Tanakh times, why aren't they sacrifices, right? We don't have chickens. We have doves, right? Torim, b'nei Yonah, but we don't have chickens. And we don't necessarily have an answer. Zohar Amar, who is a researcher in Bar Ilan University, we're going to come back to him a little bit later. He says, we don't like chickens. Chickens are dirty. Chickens are promiscuous. Chickens fight. That's why we have cockfighting. Okay? Chickens are brazen, whatever that means, right? Take a look at this Gemara in Beitza. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said there are 3 impudent ones, or brazen ones, azim in Hebrew. The Jewish people among the nations, the dog among animals, and the rooster among birds. And Mar says, we don't like the chicken so much. It's not something we want to bring into the peaceful, quiet, beautiful, peace-loving place of the Beit HaMikdash. It's an interesting conjecture. Okay? But people for sure had chickens. But remember what we said before, what you're not allowed to have in Jerusalem? One of the things was chickens. Why? Okay, one may not raise chickens in Jerusalem due to the sacrificial meat. The Gemara explains, the Mishnah says, what do chickens do? I don't know if anybody here has backyard chickens, but chickens like to root around, right? They like to look for stuff. They like to play with stuff. They'll mess around. And we're worried that the chicken is going to find some garbage, is going to find something impure. It's going to drag it over to some kind of pure meat or truma, right? Something that the Kohanim eat impurity and mess it up. Is this really such a worry? Maybe, maybe not, but we don't want it in Jerusalem. No backyard chickens in Jerusalem. Okay, moving right along. We still have quite a few things to do. Okay, olives and olive oil. Okay, olive oil is a very, very important product even today. I don't know if this is true in North America. Here in Israel, we've been having a shortage of olive oil. I think in general in the Mediterranean this year, there's a shortage of olive oil. Olive oil is one of the top 3 products, right? We talk in Hayayim Shamoa that if we behave, we'll have rain, and then we will have Dagan, Tirosh, V'yitzhar. We're going to have the grain, we're going to have the wine or the grape juice, and we're going to have the yitzhar, the oil. Okay, so the oil is a primary product. Obviously, olives are one of the 7 species. Olive oil is used in the temple to light the menorah, to anoint the vessels. You have it as part of the korbanot, right? Olive oil is very important. A lot of olive trees in the Galilee, in the portion of Asher, right? We hear about Asher, Asher Shmenat Lachmo. His bread is oily, is rich. Okay, Tovel, B'Shem, and Raglav. We have found olive presses all over the land of Israel, right? If you're a kid who grows up in Israel and, by fifth grade, you bring a kid to see an olive press and they're like, oh my God, I can't see any more olive presses, right? They're all over the place. They're everywhere. Okay. But we want to understand a little, how do you make olive oil? Because it's actually somewhat more complicated than one might think. So there are basically two stages to making olive oil, no matter how sophisticated or unsophisticated your equipment is. Okay, you gather your olives and first you have to crush them. Okay, in the language of the Mishnah, this is tchina. You crush them, you break them. Okay, a little bit of oil, high quality oil, comes out of that crushing. That's what we call katit, virgin, extra virgin. That's what you bring to use in the menorah. But there's still a lot left. And you gather up all those crushed olives and you put them in a basket. Okay. And then the second stage is called te'ina, squeezing. You squish them and you get out more oil. And each time you squish them more, you get out some more oil. The earlier squeezings are better quality, the later are worse. When you finally squeezed out every bit of oil there is, you're left with the pulp and the pits, and even that is useful. Okay, the Mishnah talks about that. It's called gefet. You use it as fuel because it still has a lot of that oily residue in it, and it's very useful as fuel. It's very volatile. Okay, so in the early days, what did you do? You took a rock, you crushed your olives. You took the baskets, you put heavy boards, you put boards on top, that squeezed it out. As time went on, okay, people became more sophisticated. We'll get to that in a second. Just take a look at the second source here. The Mishnah in Menachot gives us an idea of this stages, right? And how the oil changes each time. There are 3 harvests of olive each year, and each of them, 3 different grades of oils are produced. Okay, 3 harvests we're not going to deal with, but what does it mean, the different grades? How is the first olive harvest process? One picks the ripe olives, crushes them in a mortar, places them inside a wicker basket. This is the first grade of oil. Then you press down with a beam. This is the second grade of oil. Then ground and press down. This is the third grade. The first grade is fit for the menorah. The rest are fit for use in meal offerings. Okay, so we have these stages. Now, the second more sophisticated method, by Hellenistic times, somebody comes up with this thing. We're not going to give it a name yet because we're going to see the name is confusing. But basically, you have a bowl on the bottom. You have a round stone with a beam, and you have usually an animal that goes around and crushes the olives. That's stage 1. Okay? Then you take them and you press them. By late Second Temple times, the pressing becomes more sophisticated. What they come up with? They came up with using a beam. Okay, this is called a bad or a korah, weighted down. Okay, you put that beam on top of the baskets, and that gets out more oil. Okay, by Byzantine times, okay, 1500 years ago or so, come up with an even better method. Instead of weighing down a beam, that you have a screw that pushes down harder and harder until you get out all the oil. Okay, so you have more sophistication as time goes by. Now, the more sophisticated, the less likely you can do it. Just like we have rules about what you're allowed to do on Yom Tov, you have rules about what you're allowed to do during Shemitah. So take a look here, the third source. Olives may not be prepared in an olive press or a small olive press, but he may crush them and bring them to a small olive press in the field. During Shemitah, I can gather in the olives that are growing, but I can't do industrial grade olive pressing. I can do it the way they used to do it in the old days, crush it with a rock, bring it to a small press, but I can't do this fancy setup that I have here. Okay, now what are all these things called? The most common, the most important term, the larger term, an olive press is called a beit bad. Okay, now some of you might know the word bad, right? Bad in Hebrew means fabric. Right? But it doesn't only mean fabric. Think about the Torah, right? Think about the Mishkan. And in the Mishkan, we have the Aron, right? We have the Ark of the Covenant that is held in place. How do you move it from place to place? You have badim. You have 2 poles, right? So a bad is really a pole, and that's what's going on here. This, the Korah in Mishnaic language, is a bad. This is the main part of the olive press. Okay, this is why we talk about when you sell an olive press, what's included. So one opinion is that this beam is included, even though it's a movable thing. You could take it with you, but this is the essence of the olive press. Okay. Bod is a very interesting word. It also means stand alone, right? Why is a fabric called bod? Because it's made out of single threads. What are we when we're all by ourselves? We're livad, right? We won't go into this more deeply, but it's kind of cool etymology. Okay, so that's our beit bod. But then we have all these other words, right? The Mishnah and Bava Batra, people who are doing the daf, this was last week, 2 weeks ago, right? One who sells an olive press has sold. And then we have a long list of terms, and it's confusing what these terms mean. The yam, the memel, the bitulot, the avirim, the galgal, and the korah. So everybody agrees the korah, we know that's what that is. That's the bod. Okay, if you go on a tour in Israel, most people will say to you, this is the yam, this bowl, and this crushing stone is the memel. However, there's a scholar whose name was Rafi Frankel, who did an exhaustive study of olive presses, and he says, no, that's not what those terms really mean. This is called the bottom millstone, and we actually have an Eretz Yisrael Gemara, Yerushalmi Gemara, that uses these terms, the bottom millstone and the top millstone. What's the yam and the memel? The yam is this surface on the bottom where the memel, excuse me, where you press down on the baskets, and the yam is where the olive oil flows, right? A yam, like a sea. And the bitulot, it's a little easier. The beams on either side of the press. The avirim are the wooden boards that press down on the baskets. And the galgal seems to be the screw that's pushing down. Okay, so we have all these different terms. Do not worry if you didn't get all of them, you are probably not going to press olives, even though today, by the way, there are still a few traditional olive press, mostly Arabs in the Galilee. But we do have, this was such a part of people's everyday life, like so many things, Chazal use it as a mashal, right? They use it as an image, right? So take a look at the last source here. Just as the olives are, Am Yisrael is compared to many things, one of them is olives. Rather, just as the olive, while it is on the tree, one picks it. Then one takes it down from the tree and it is beaten. And after it is beaten, it is taken to the olive press and placed into the mill where one grinds it. Then one surrounds it with ropes, brings stones, and then they produce their oil. So too Israel. Idolaters come, beat them from place to place, incarcerate them, bind them in chains, and surround them with fences. Then they repent, and the Holy One, blessed be He, answers them. Very too appropriate for our days today. Okay, we're going to do wine, and that's all we're going to do for today, I think, because I see there's a lot of comments. Okay, wine. Wine is the most important beverage. Wine gets its own blessing, right? Wine is what we use to begin and end Shabbat. We use it on the Mizbeach, on the altar. We use it for Kiddushin, right? When a couple gets married. It's also one of those top three. We also use it in the temple, right? Very, very important. Many, many wine presses found in the land of Israel. But with the Muslim conquest of the land of Israel in the 7th century, devout Muslims do not drink wine. And so wine culture kind of disappears from the land of Israel. It only starts again with Zionism in the 19th century. And up until, I would say, 20, 30 years ago, there really wasn't much in the way of wine culture in the land of Israel. Today, boutique wineries all over the place, and people are learning the secrets of wine again. And there actually are people who are studying what were the ancient grape varieties, what was ancient viticulture, and that's actually a fascinating thing. But I'm going to talk for 1 minute about the strange custom that the Gemara talks about, which is watering down your wine. Okay, Gemara in Brachot says one does not recite a blessing over wine until he adds water to it, right? Which sounds so crazy. The rabbis say one recites a blessing, but the Tzaddik just taught in the Tosefta over wine until he added water to it. One does not recite Borei Pri HaGefen, fruit of the vine, but rather Borei Pri HaEtz, fruit of the tree. Why? So Rashi says why? Their wine was very strong and could not be drunk without water. If you ask most people who know a little bit about Jewish history, why did they water down their wine? They'll say it was very strong. Okay, not everybody agrees with that. First of all, again, our same Zohar Amar, he says fascinating, right? Rashi, the Rishonim, who mostly come from Northern European countries, okay, their wine was less alcoholic than the wine from Mediterranean countries. Now, if you take wine grapes that grow in a warm and sunny place and you naturally ferment them without adding anything, the sugar that we have in that wine will reach 14, 15% alcohol. In Northern Europe, it's much more likely that it's going to be 8 to 10% alcohol. So really, Rashi is comparing his own reality, saying their wine was much stronger, and he's correct. Okay, but today in the land of Israel, most wine that you're going to buy, unless it's like really like, Buzz, Moscato, is going to be 12, 13, 14%, like in the time of the Gemara. And we don't water down our wine. Why did they water down their wine? Partly it was cultural. Greeks and Romans thought that watered down wine was the way to go. If you drink your wine straight, you're barbaric. Partly it was because they drank wine as really as a beverage, right? They would drink it through long banquets. You want to keep your wits about you through a long banquet. You're drinking cup after cup after cup. You can't drink it straight. You've got to water it down, right? They drank it to make their water more palatable. Their water wasn't always so clean, so healthy, so good. They put in some wine. Other people say, no, they added the water to make the wine more palatable. The wine would turn vinegary and it wasn't so good. You would add some water, right? B'kitzur, there seem to have been a lot of reasons to do this, not only because it was very strong. Okay? And we even have, this is very interesting, take a look at the bottom. Shmuel said, if you drank this is our 4 cups for the Seder, if you drank them undiluted, you filled your obligation. Rava said he has fulfilled the obligation to drink the 4 cups of wine, but not to drink in a way that expresses freedom, right? Lo yatsa yidei chirut. Why? Because sophisticated, wealthy, free people drink their wine watered down. That's the way to do it. And there's actually a halachic debate if we should do this today. Do what you like. I am not being posik for anyone. Picture over here of a wine press, which is nice. What I want you to notice is here's the part where you press the grapes, and then you have a channel to a pool lower down, right? So the heavier parts, the seeds and whatever, stay up here. The juice goes down to the bottom. Okay, we still have to do bees and honey, but we'll do that next time. Let's see, what did people have to say in the chat? Okay, bringing your stuff to the store, yes, like we used to do in Israel years ago. Okay. Ounces, pints. Yes, I never get those things right. I'm sorry. Okay. Agoronomos is it's not where agora comes from. Agora is the first word, and agoronomos is the guy who counts, right? Nomos, if I'm remembering correctly, is counting, right? Anyone who knows the Greek better than me, but it comes from the agora. Man has created work animals. Yes, man has figured out how to use animals to work for him. Maybe those, right, there are explanations why those trades are not good. There are easier ways to cheat, right? Okay. Maybe where the sandik sits for the bris, the cathedra. Nice. Maybe, I don't know. Okay, multitasking, right? The spinning is multitasking. A pelech is a spindle, yes. Right, cathedra is also a chair, exactly. I don't know if like, does the term come from Greek, from Hebrew? I don't know, but that's true. We do use that as cathedra. We are required to cook before Yom Tov? No, for sure people cook on Yom Tov. And there even is like a gadget you can use for your gas. But there are a lot of people saying, I don't want to cook on Yom Tov. I want to be in shul. I want to see my friends. And they cook before, and it's possible to do that. Today, there are groups that buy an entire animal. Okay, I don't know about that. How much do common products cost? That's a very good question. I don't think I could answer that off the top of my head. I could try and find out. It's a very interesting question. I don't know. We definitely hear about, people who are like day laborers. You have to pay them that day because they have to go and buy bread for that day. Okay, meaning your wages would go for food for that day. Goats eat everything. Are we mentioning about Jerusalem? You wouldn't have goats either. You couldn't have large animals for sure. Okay, memel, according to most people, is the crushing stone. According to Rafi Frankel, I also forget it, right, is the surface where you put the baskets when you press them. Okay, Ladino, I don't know what Ladino is connected here. I'm sure there was a connection. Oh, yes, thank you. That's very nice. There is a Kabbalistic explanation, right? Adding water, water is wine is wisdom, but it's also din, it's also judgment, and water is chesed and is rachamim, and you should mix the two, right? Is a very beautiful idea. And Rav Kook also, his famous story about Rav Kook when he went to the non-religious moshavot and he made Havdalah and he poured water into his wine and he said, really, we should drink the wine straight, but we don't want to be mavdil. We don't want to separate ourselves so much. We want to water down that separation, which is something we could also learn from today. So thank you. That's a very nice thing to add. Sephardim added water to the wine. Oh, interesting. Okay. Wine was generally sold as concentrate in the ancient Near East. Okay, that also would make sense, right? That's another explanation if it's concentrate as opposed to wine. But we're really talking more, I think, about people who are making their own wine, right? We're not talking about wine that you're getting imported from Rome. You're talking about you're making wine or your neighbor's making wine or the guy down the street is making wine. That's what I think. Okay, other comments. Nomos is law. Thank you, Asher. Okay, I knew it was something connected. Okay, so the Agora Nomos is the guy who's the law, the sheriff in the Agora. Okay. Oh, very nice. Can I say this out loud, Rochelle? I volunteered years ago in the excavations in the old city where they found false weights that had a small hole where the storekeepers could add lead to correct the weight when the inspectors came around. Brilliant. Very sad, but brilliant. Thank you. I like that. I mean, I don't like it, but it's great. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Thank you, everybody. We should have a Shabbat Shalom, Bisorot Tovot, and we will meet again, God willing, next week.
Thank you, Shulie.
Thank you, Shulie.
תודה רבה.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was wonderful.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. So informative.